Hi, my name is Barbara Derrick. This is a live recording from my art studio. Mind me, I'm looking at this. Okay. My name is Barbara Derrick. I'm recording live from my native studio art studio. And I'm the author of Walking in Your Power, Lessons from the Grandmothers. And what I've done is I've started reading live chapters from my book. Those who join in my private Facebook group, Leadership Art with Barbara Derrick, on Facebook will get access to the free calls. I will post that link in a bit here. I'm on chapter 8, and I thought YouTubers would love to listen to a part of the chapter. Chapter 8, Broken Arrow, South Direction, Emotional. On a cold wintry January day, she stood there watching the fire consume the last of her late mother's items. It was customary in her culture to burn all belongings a person wore or touched prior to their death. Things like boots, a coat, clothing, or their favorite items such as a necklace, rings, wallet, key ring, or medications had to be burned. Burning of the items was insurance the loved one would have no reason to look back and no distraction of the spirit as it journeyed back to the spirit world. As the flames shot upwards, there was peace in knowing her late mother's spirit would not get stuck on earth looking for any of her objects. A small number of the family came together in the evening quietly. They were spent from the days of travel, preparation, and organization of the wake. Not too far from the fire, across the road in a house, a group of people had pooled together to party. Through the darkness, Musqua saw vehicle headlights, the roar of engines, and the squeal of tires on the ice as the drivers raced up and down the icy road. There were others who drank outside who hollered and screamed profanities that filled the air. For some reason, this had become a norm for grieving in the community. She paid no attention as she watched the flames dance and the light move back and forth into the night. All of a sudden, a vehicle drove up the gravel driveway. Windows were rolled down with the loud music of Nazareth belting from the cab. As the driver stepped on the gas, the broken muffler roared loudly and it caught everyone's attention just before the slamming of the vehicle brakes. Out fell two drunken young adults, so intoxicated it was a wonder for the driver of the vehicle was still functioning. At the fire, the men that stood by Musqua, along with other women at the campfire, remained quiet and unresponsive to the visitors. Musqua's anger arose when she saw how close they had come to hitting her vehicle. She watched one of the young men stagger to a fence within sight to begin to urinate. Her eyes shifted to the other, swaying gently back and forth in the dark by a tree. Musqua approached the intoxicated man who was a driver and said in a stern and quiet voice, "You had best move your truck and leave." The drunken young man slowly raised his head, latched eyes with her, and said, "You effin' bitch. Who do you think you are? I don't have to listen to you, you bitch. Why don't you just shut the F up? I have a good mind to punch you out. You're not even family," he screamed. Musqua stood quietly unwavering from the verbal attack. She had become accustomed to dealing with drunks, but quickly felt anger rushing through her veins. In all respect, behavior like this at a wake? She felt her rage spike, and with a slow, methodical breath, she inhaled to calm herself. Musqua knew the outcome would be based on her reaction. Meanwhile, the other young man, after relieving himself by a corral fence, staggered past the both of them. He repeated apologies about his drinking and that of his cousin. "Sorry, man. We're just all fucked up," he said. Musqua's recalled her first thought. And we're expected to put up with this drunken behavior and be nice? When did we as a people make it all right for someone else to abuse us? Why is this acceptable? No one by the fire moved. She saw disengaged relatives. It was as if the scene was only being played out on her behalf. Finally, as a young man screamed, "Fuck you!" a few more times a relative interceded the cussing and began to talk to him. An air of kindness and understanding came from the voice in the dark as he or she spoke with the drunken adult man. Eventually, after about an hour of conversation, the young man got into the vehicle and drove past Musqua's vehicle. Musqua lifted her head from her journal writing. She was sitting at her kitchen table reading excerpts of her journal that were penned 6 months ago. She was made out to be the bad guy and the drunken young man the hero. Really? If we were to call this for what it was, wasn't it enabling? The young man was soothed and comforted for his wrongdoing, making it all right for him to abuse women and community members. What message did that send to everyone else? After the writing she read, we will accept the things we don't want in our lives by keeping them alive. We will fight to protect it, even if it means sacrificing our lives. Then she wondered, why do we do that? Why did I do that in the past? When her mother was drunk and disorderly, it was easier to ignore the behavior or leave the house. As she moved about the house, she pondered heavily on the addiction. Musqua began to clean her bedroom. When she turned, her image from the mirror reflected back to her. She was in a deep thought about setting personal boundaries. There was a rule a friend shared with her one time, and she now referred to it as rule number 1. To each his own, unless it affects me personally. She recalled the difficulties she had in setting personal boundaries, calling upon not only her courage to be assertive when decision-making or safety was violated. Rule number 2. It isn't just our right, but our duty to take responsibility for how others treat us. The application of the rule changed the way she wanted to be treated by others. And rule number 3. No more crazy making. We do not have the power to make anyone do anything. Too often she heard, "You make me angry," or "You made me drink." She grew up believing she had some kind of evil power to make people do things, and it gave way to others falsely accusing her for things she never did. A pattern of crazy making. Musqua's interest in the Mohawk began when she heard a story about how the Iroquois Confederacy's 5 groups decided to come together around the years 1400 to 1600. A prophet came to the people and emphasized the need for all 5 groups, the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca, to come together as one to become impenetrably strong. The prophet could not get everybody's attention until he used his arrows in demonstration. He showed how fragile one arrow, the symbol of one group, snapped easily when he bent it over his knee. Then, taking 5 arrows, he repeated the same, and the arrows did not break. The Mohawk did well. In fact, she heard the United States Senate gave acknowledgement in the 1980s to the Iroquois Confederacy's contribution in the development of the Constitution. The image of a broken arrow and its bundle of arrows remained in her memory for a very long time. In her own community, the efforts of traditional teachings and the revitalization of cultural ways had slowly taken hold over the years, and the numbers of homicides, suicides, and addictions had dropped. However, in the 1970s to 1980s, youth suicide rates and high school dropout rates were at an all-time high in Aboriginal communities. Musqua approached the coffee pot. She poured herself another cup. Abuse? You can bandage an open wound to protect it from infection and leave it for a day. If you forget to change it daily, the wound becomes infected. Any number of things can happen with an infection, depending on the length of time it goes untreated. The drunken, screaming young person had become a good example of woundedness. He also had become a visual image of the broken arrow in the bundle. Musqua sat down, returned to her journal writing, and thought to herself, that young man represented something that was missing, if she could just put her finger on it. While a majority of her families spoke their own language, but many more that lived off reserve who didn't speak the language. The second insight was the loss of traditional values and customs within the communities on reserve and off reserve. All of a sudden, the image of the broken arrow nestled in amidst the bundle of arrows started to make sense. At the heart of every culture and its language, one of the main structural pillars for communicating values, beliefs, and customs, and its importance to the connection to all my relations. Musqua lifted her head for a moment and penned these words in her journal. I am Chilcotin, or Tsai, rock, Kon, river, Teen, people of. I am also Nenkaini, or Nen, earth, land, Kai, surface, Ni, Deni, or person. As she read what she wrote out aloud, she felt the pulse of the words. They soothed her as they rolled off her tongue. Musqua thought about how the 4 directions fit within the warrior bow and arrow bundle. In her reflection, she saw how the 4 directions, a living, eco-teaching model, was part of each one of us. From her experience, she recognized language needed storytelling by the elders. She drifted to a past memory. In front of her sat one of her late elders on a chair. He was introducing a story. Chon, chon. It meant, once again. He said he started his stories off in this manner because chon, chon meant he was the carrier of others' stories. He continued, 2 men who went hunting in the mountains brought down this big animal, they said, in order to keep warm. After they cleaned it, they both crawled inside of it to keep warm. At the time, Musqua had asked of the elder if it could have been a mastodon. There it was, the first story of hunting. One could imagine spear or bow or arrow. The elder said he had seen a picture of one in a magazine once, and it was a mastodon. There were no rifles in that period of time when these big animals roamed the earth. According to her family knowledge, obsidian used for flint and arrowheads were harvested on Anaheim Peak, a volcanic belt in British Columbia. Musqua was excited with her new revelation. Can you imagine what a mastodon hunt might have looked like in the days of the ancestors? Did they use spears? Or did they pack heavier bows or arrows? The obsidian arrowhead represented the language within the culture. To make one, a bow hunter needed knowledge to create a pointed tip comprised of gradual curve-like shapes like that of a mussel shell. She knew an arrowhead maker had to know where to harvest the materials, its preparation, and the techniques to perfect a very sharp missile for hunting. Hunting a mastodon, and failure of the projectile killing the animal could make the difference between the hunter's life or death. Musqua saw the obsidian arrowhead in the north of the medicine wheel because the material was forged by the earth's heat or fire through volcanic activity. In the north, men were given the ability to provide for their families, and it is here they formed societies to strengthen the male role. Creator had given them counsel and the gift of discipline for themselves and their family. She pondered on fractured teachings that affected Aboriginal parenting in a way that had resulted in giving men direction to apply force. One good example was the rule of thumb. Created in the 1700s, gave Englishmen the right to correct their women in a moderate fashion. Nonetheless, it gave way to spousal abuse. According to law, he could use a stick or rod, or bigger than his thumb, as a form of mild discipline of his wife or children. Musqua shuddered. The punishment wasn't too different than corporal punishment within the school system. Today, the law has been obliterated and the punishment an abusive and violent way to teach wrongdoing. Musqua could see how relationship imbalance between men and women, when distinct societal houses that had once been the foundation of tribal justice formed by clans, were banned by the government. Instead, both sexes were now grouped together as one in their learning. In the past, women's groups focused on the mastery of counseling and harvesting and application of medicines for health issues, while the men held counsel with one another and traded masteries around fishing, hunting, and any other expertise. The arrowhead illustrates women and the element of water. Musqua revered the water's ability to compress gases in the petrification of the minerals from the earth and the creation of the obsidian. The obsidian, an analogy of the sacredness of her own waters within her body. Through the teachings passed down in the language, a woman learned her connection to the water and its influence by the rhythm of the moon. In the days of the ancestors, natural light came from the stars, moon, and the sun. The effect of fluorescent lighting and radio waves created from electricity and modern-day appliances knocked women's moon cycle off balance, creating sickness. Today's woman has more stress in her life and less time to look up to Grandmother Moon to fill her eyes with natural spectrum lighting. She needs to watch the moon a few minutes every night when it is full. When she does, her body will spring back to its normal rhythm. The elderly teachers also reminded women in the teaching circles to change the abuse. The manipulative abuse continues when men take the roles of the female as his own in the quiet quest of power. Women! Pick up your bundle and get to work. In the circle of Grandmother Moon teachings, it is a space created for women to heal from sexual, physical, emotional, or a mental abuse, and not to be attended by men until they are committed to healing themselves. In most countries of the world, the full moon ceremony is for women only. Musqua got up and moved around. She thought about how the shaft of the arrow was definitely a fitting symbol for culture, where beliefs, customs, and values create a sense of personal identity. An arrow maker knows his or her wood. Douglas fir is too heavy because of its granular structure, but ash is an indestructible material. Yet ash might also make the arrow sail in the air too slowly. Culture is a way of thinking and behavior related to upbringing. She sighed loudly as she recalled a time when finding a street gang was all about fitting in somewhere. The reward for loyalty and bravery was acceptance. Her mind drifted back to the two drunken young men. A sense of unconditional love for them filtered through her being. The feathers attached to the shaft of the arrow come from the waterfowl and are iconic of family, where trust and faith are built. It takes the traditional eye of a teacher to guide us in the right selection of feathers, their attachment to the shaft, and the techniques to keep them from falling off. Like parenting, a soft, sturdy, downy feather will determine which direction the arrow will spin once released from the bow. Too often, a beginner will attach a large feather, but its weight will prevent the arrow from releasing from the bow. Some of the grandmothers said the effect of the generational abuses and its anger had created burdens like this in the future generations. Some arrow makers make decisions to change the look of the arrow for aesthetic purposes and gravitate to a feather that is too soft, causing the arrow to fall too quickly on the ground after its release. The teachings from the grandmothers indicated colossal change in parenting was caused by a lack of parental guidance caused by fear and then overprotection of their children that created self-entitlement in some of the younger generation. She moved towards the window, holding her journal in one hand and a pen in the other. One of the elderly men said the integral part of the arrow is the nock, or the bottom node, the part of the arrow that often gets dismissed because of its size. The nock of the arrow represents self-identity because it is the most essential in the community building process. A bow hunter knows how to properly nock the arrow onto the bowstring. His father's teachings equipped him. He knew if an arrow required excessive force to release the arrow, it would not be carried by the wind. He also had the experience of wins and losses in his hunting while out with the men. To know oneself, his or her capabilities, strengths, and weaknesses developed self-confidence. The bow hunter, male or female, was raised by everyone in the traditional family. To her, the nock was the clan houses. Every family had a particular gift. Bear clan policed the community and or were medicine healers. Sturgeon became meditators. Hoof clans were warriors, while the small four-legged held the position of counselors. Musqua had an affinity for the sweat lodge as it brought to her new beginnings and meanings to her purpose and her journey. She recalled the day the spirits presented her with a song. It was her clan house welcoming song. It came to her in 1993 while she was gardening. An overwhelming need to bring out her drum filled her. She recalled how the lyrics arrived slowly, but the words didn't come until later. Finally, one day her family taught her words to the 4 directions. Her late mother and aunts said, "We say Guyane for up there, north. Goonich for down there, south. Goonich for over there, west, and Gouda to go that way, east." North is, correction, Goudi. How excited she was, combining the words with the rhythm of the hand drum. At first it felt awkward for her to sing in her language. She did not want anyone to hear. Over a period of time she would overcome her shame and become more comfortable with her Indianness. She smiled not too long ago when she heard someone say, "When God happened, you happened." As you took your first breath, God took his first breath. The 4 directions of the medicine wheel had given her structure to find her way back onto the red path of her ancestors. The east characterized birth. As a child, our connection to the Creator is maintained through a thread of light that gradually becomes less as the child reaches the age of 7 years old. The south epitomizes air and feeling like that of pride generated from parental guidance. The correspondence to feeling good generates healthy self-value and fuels tradition of her community or people. She thought about the West, the physical area, and how she felt being raised outside of the language. When she was amidst her mother's family, Musqueam struggled with understanding the meaning of the words and how different tones and glottal changed what was being said. It was a feeling of being very different, one that described to her as walking between the European and native worlds. Looking towards the north of the medicine wheel where the fire beings and the elders' wisdom becomes one with the language. A place where protocols, acceptable behavior, and the correct way to live up to the earth with dignity are taught to the community. A time when the snows arrive, temperatures drop, the leaves fall from the trees, and teach us about death. It is a place where we go into introspection, much like the bear does in hibernation. Many communities lack elderly wisdom and guidance. There, the analogy of the broken arrow in the bundle might be found. Chapter summary. From Musqueam's perspective, the 2 drunken young men represented enabling abuse in our lives. Additionally, she examined the meaning around broken arrow. Reclaiming our personal power through the medicine wheel in our lives, its attributes, and problem solving through the use of the traditional justice system. Musqueam touched upon awarenesses around healing ourselves and our belongingness. Exercise. The exercise can be found on page 93 of the book as step 1, where you will use your birth year and line it up with your clan. And the clan is hypothetical to give you an experience as a reader to what it might feel like to have or be in a clan. And there's discussions on my website around that. And step 2 will be with your group or your clan members in coming together and creating a viable relationship with all living things. And there is a step 3 in the group where, as a hypothetical clan group, we can discuss what clan council might have looked like. I look forward to meeting you over there on my private Facebook page. Once again, Leadership Art Mentorship with Barbara Derrick. Goodbye for now. Bye-bye.